Something very bad is brewing in Moscow. As Russia faces increasing economic hardships brought on by its disastrous and enormously costly invasion of Ukraine, its leader, Vladimir Putin, is resorting to the most desperate measures. He's eradicating generals, stealing assets from those he once called loyal advisors and friends, and ordering his intelligence agency, the FSB, to essentially cannibalize the Kremlin from within in a frantic scramble for power, money, and resources. The chances of this ending well for Putin or any of his Kremlin cronies are non-existent, but it appears to be the only option left open to him, which just goes to show how bleak the situation has become. The statistics paint a very clear picture. While Russia may have made some gains over the course of this war, they've come at a colossal cost. It suffered well over 1 million casualties, with an estimated 250,000 killed. Not since World War II has Russia or the Soviet Union lost so many lives. It's seen thousands of pieces of military equipment, including tanks, armored vehicles, personnel carriers, radar stations, air defenses, missile systems, aircraft and artillery completely destroyed. Billions of dollars in hardware all gone. It's also proven powerless in stopping its economy from crumbling beneath its feet as it buckles beneath the weight of international sanctions, fractured trading relationships with nations across the globe, and the exorbitant costs of the conflict itself. Its national wealth fund is a fraction today of what it once was. Its currency, the ruble, has plummeted in value, and even the assets of its oligarchs have been frozen and turned against them, thanks to the G7's Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration (ERA) loans for Ukraine program, which uses the interest from frozen Russian assets to provide billions of dollars of support for Kyiv and its armed forces. And that's the part that matters the most to Vladimir Putin. He's proven he has little regard for the lives of Russian soldiers or civilians, as he happily throws them into the meat grinder without a care in the world, arrogantly proclaiming that we have not had a single loss in vain, despite blatant evidence to the contrary, showing large amounts of his countrymen losing their lives due to lack of training, outdated equipment, or nonsensical tactics. Money, however, is something Putin cares about a great deal, because money equates to power, especially in modern-day Russia, where corruption is king and almost anything and anyone can be bought or paid off. And with every tank that Ukraine blows up, every successful drone strike its forces pull off, every oil refinery, production plant, fuel storage depot, or billion-dollar radar station that burns, Russia's economy suffers, its budget tightens, and those at the top, with the most to lose, become increasingly desperate. It's well past the point where this war can be called sustainable. Russia has committed far too much, far too quickly, and suffered losses in quantities that almost nobody could have expected when the invasion began, back in February 2022. Now, money is well and truly drying up. Construction projects across the country are suffering disruption and delays, while big Russian banks, like VTB, are finding it increasingly difficult to cope with the large amounts of loan defaults and huge financial strains imposed upon them. In short, the Russian regime is running out of money. That's extremely bad news for Putin, not just for the prospective continuation of his war on Ukraine, but also for his own position as president. His future and his legacy are on the line right now, because the more money he and those close to him lose, the weaker he becomes. And the pressure is piling up. Across Russia, regional governors are begging Moscow for money to fix their crumbling cities and collapsing infrastructure. Even Belarus, one of Russia's closest long-term allies, headed by what many see as a Putin puppet in President Alexander Lukashenko, has recently called on Moscow to provide financial aid to support its state budget, which is running at a major deficit. The Kremlin has very few remaining options to pay its debts and keep up with the cost of the war and keep its country afloat. It can't do what a lot of other countries around the world would do, like asking for loans or support from allies, since it barely has any allies left, and any country that continues to do business with Russia is at risk of losing more than it gains due to international pressure, sanctions and tariffs. With options, time and funds running out, Putin has resorted to the most desperate and dastardly of measures. He's begun using the Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, the successor to the Soviet-era KGB, to steal and seize assets from its own generals, high-ranking officers, former ministers, lawmakers, and other individuals who once held positions of authority and power. These are people who have dedicated their lives to Russia, only to be stabbed in the back by the man who runs the country. Once again, the statistics help to paint the picture. In 2025 alone, almost 100 senior Russian officials have been charged with corruption, with an average of 14 new cases each month between January and July of this year. That's the highest number in a decade, and if the rate continues, 2025's total number of officials facing corruption charges will far exceed that of 2024, which saw 122 cases overall. Those involved have been relieved of their duties, fired from their positions without warning, and taken into custody. Some have even died, often in suspicious circumstances. The most dramatic and widely discussed case of this kind was that of former Russian Minister of Transport, Roman Starovoyt. Starovoyt assumed his role in May 2024, having previously served as the governor of the Kursk region from 2019 to 2024. He was also a lifelong supporter of Putin's United Russia Party. On the morning of July 7, Starovoyt was fired by Putin for unknown reasons. Later that day, he was found dead in a park on the edge of Moscow, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Only a couple of months earlier, Starovoyt's successor as the governor of Kursk, Alexei Smirnov, was also relieved of his duties and arrested, charged with embezzling billions of rubles that were allegedly intended to strengthen fortifications in the region. In the summer of 2024, Ukraine managed to break through Kursk defenses with ease, capturing dozens of settlements and villages and establishing a small buffer zone over the border into Russia before eventually being pushed back. According to the charges filed against him, Smirnov failed to use the necessary funds to prevent that incursion, instead siphoning off money for himself. While that may be true, many political commentators have argued that Smirnov has simply been used as a scapegoat to cover up the Kremlin's own failings in safeguarding its territory and people. Andrei Pertsev, a Russian journalist who works at the anti-Kremlin news outlet Meduza, stated, "They tried to make him the scapegoat, as the incursion mainly happened because there weren't enough soldiers to protect the border, but it's easier to put the blame on a civilian official." Russian media, meanwhile, has pushed the narrative that Starovoyt killed himself as he may have been implicated in the Smirnov case, or might have faced similar charges and couldn't cope with the pressure or the threat of a future behind bars. Many of the mourners attending the former transport minister's funeral disagree with that consensus, with some suggesting that Starovoyt was not the type of man to take his life and that something more sinister may have happened. What's even more interesting and bizarre is the fact that another transport ministry official died the very same day as Starovoyt. Andrei Kornichuk, who worked under the former minister, was said to have died of acute heart failure by the authorities at the age of 42. It may just be a coincidence, but these kinds of coincidences seem to occur with alarming frequency in Putin's Russia. In recent years, there have been numerous cases of officials and lawmakers suddenly falling out of windows, taking their own lives, or dying in other unusual and unexpected ways. And while Starovoyt is certainly the most high-profile recent case, he's far from the only one. In July, Maxim Yegorov, the former governor of the Tambov region in central Russia, was arrested and placed in pre-trial detention, facing charges of abuse of power. Yegorov served as the Tambov governor from 2021 to 2024, but has suddenly been accused of accepting a large bribe. Alexei Soshnikov, former head of the capital construction department of the Belgorod region, was also taken into custody in July, facing large-scale embezzlement charges. So too were a couple of his subordinates, along with Novosibirsk businessman Sergei Petryakov. Back in July, the vice-governor of Belgorod, Rustem Zainulin, was also detained and charged with fraud, related to thefts of funds that were intended to be used for construction protective structures along the region's borders, another case with strong similarities to that of former Kursk governor Alexei Smirnov. Stanislav Shultsev, deputy chairman of the Novgorod, was also taken into custody on July 18, accused of large-scale bribery, while the same region's transport minister, Konstantin Kuranov, was arrested a few days later on similar charges. The same story is taking place across Russia's military too. Only days ago, a Russian military court sentenced Major General Denis Putilov, the former head of the Central Military District's Armored Vehicle Service, to 8.5 years behind bars in a maximum security penal colony on charges of large-scale bribery. Putilov is just the latest of at least 8 high-ranking military officers to be taken down in Russia's so-called anti-corruption campaign. Former Deputy Defense Minister Dmitry Bulgakov was also charged with causing over 1.3 billion rubles, or more than $16 million in damages. Former head of personnel at the Ministry of Defense Yuri Kuznetsov was charged with accepting a large bribe. Major General Valery Muminyanov, Deputy Commander of the Leningrad Military District for Logistics, was also arrested, as was Lieutenant General Vadim Shamarin, Deputy Chief of the General Staff, sentenced to 7 years behind bars. Major General Ivan Popov is another victim of the campaign, receiving a 5-year sentence for supposedly stealing metal that was supposed to be used to build fortifications in the occupied Zaporizhia region of Ukraine, while Russia's former Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov got one of the biggest sentences of all, 13 years in prison for accepting large-scale bribes. And the list goes on and on. With every week and month that passes, it appears that more and more people in positions of power across Russia, but especially in border regions near to Ukraine, are being relieved of their duties and charged with corruption. In the vast majority of cases, it's likely the charges are real or at least have some degree of truth to them. Corruption is part and parcel of life for those in positions of power across Russia, and many officials have no scruples when it comes to increasing their wealth and improving their quality of life via any means available to them. However, for a long time, this sort of corruption has been allowed to take place without much punishment. There was, in effect, an unwritten rule of Russia's high society that allowed officials to take bribes and siphon off funds now and then, an unofficial perk of being an authority. But that's all changing now. As Pertsev puts it, there used to be rules where people knew that once you climbed up high enough, they wouldn't mess with you. You had guarantees, and everyone understood the rules, but they do not work anymore. Carnegie Politica analyst Tatiana Stanovaya agrees, saying, "Something within the system has started to work completely differently. Any action or inaction that, in the eyes of the authorities, increases the state's vulnerability to hostile actions by the enemy must be punished mercilessly and uncompromisingly." Stanovaya added that there is now a growing sense of hopelessness among Russian officials, and going forward, the system will be ready to sacrifice increasingly prominent figures. While the Kremlin will never admit it, there's no doubt about it. This is a purge. Experts like political scientist Yekaterina Shulman agree. Shulman told Novaya Gazeta, "For an autocracy to survive, it must instill fear, but without unleashing full-scale terror. What we're seeing now is that each new arrest is not publicly framed as part of a broader campaign or purge. On the contrary, the system avoids that language. Meanwhile, growing risks for officials, the redistribution of assets, and the inability to leave the country safely are among the key destabilizing factors in today's Russia." Nina Khrushcheva, professor of international affairs at the New School in New York City and the great-great-granddaughter of the former Soviet Union leader Nikita Khrushchev, agrees, comparing the current climate in the Kremlin to that under Joseph Stalin. "This is something we have not really seen since 1953. Russia's leadership has always been capable of this kind of action, thanks to the immense power of its FSB and formerly the KGB. But for some time, Putin has seemingly resisted any large-scale purge. He still had officials arrested here and there, but not to the extent seen today. So why now? Why has Putin decided that the time is right to start turning his back on those in higher positions, those who have, despite some controversies and corruption, largely shown loyalty to the Kremlin and its cause? The answer is simple: money and power. Putin is using the FSB to take out wealthy, high-profile targets in order to steal their assets and strengthen his stranglehold on the country, and the evidence of this is clear to see, for those who know where to look. For example, not long after the former transport minister, Roman Starovoyt, killed himself, the FSB effectively took control of all of Russia's ports. In late July, Putin signed a new decree, stating that any and all foreign vessels wishing to access a Russian port will first need to seek approval from the FSB. That gives the FSB unprecedented power to control everything that's flowing both in and out of Russia for the foreseeable future. Similar stories are occurring elsewhere. As governors of border regions are randomly arrested and locked up, Putin is granting the FSB greater control within those regions, while replacing their former leaders with loyal puppets and underlings to do his bidding. Over in Dagestan too, officials are being rounded up by the FSB, and the state is seizing control of lucrative oil terminals. In the fuel industry too, the FSB exerts a troubling level of control and influence, because oil is vital for fueling Russia's war effort and propping up its floundering economy. That's one of the reasons why Ukraine so often targets pieces of energy-related infrastructure, like fuel storage tanks, depots, refineries, and oil pipelines. It's also why oil bosses and other officials so often seem to fall out of windows or randomly go missing, because the FSB either wants to shut them up, take what they have, or both. And as time continues to pass, it's like that even more of these arrests, corruption charges, and perhaps even suspicious suicides and deaths will follow. Oligarchs, generals, energy bosses, ministers, almost nobody in Russia is safe from a purge like this, which only seems to be building up in intensity. The message is clear: the Kremlin needs cash, and it has no qualms taking that cash from people who have largely been loyal servants in the past. Through the FSB, it's targeting higher-ups in fields like construction, transport, natural resources, and the military. And none of this is being done for ideological reasons or the benefits of national security, or even, as the Kremlin claims, some mission to stamp out corruption. It's purely about transferring as much wealth and control into the hands of those in charge. But when digging a little deeper, there's also another reason behind Putin's purge of generals, lawmakers, and other officials: fear. As discussed in one of our recent videos, rumors are rising across Moscow and beyond of a possible coup or rebellion among the Russian military against the Kremlin. As Russian soldiers increasingly see the futility of this war and the utter disregard that Putin and other government officials seem to have for their lives, many are believed to be growing increasingly frustrated and resentful. Even at high levels, officers, generals, majors, and more are seeing their fellow high-ranking officers randomly and unexpectedly stripped of their titles, charged with corruption, and thrown behind bars, left to rot, with their reputation in tatters, even after dedicating their entire lives to defending their homeland. Many of those officers are wondering if they'll be next, or when their time might come to be Putin's latest scapegoat. To avoid that grim fate, some might even decide to rise up, speak out, and rally the troops against Moscow itself, just like Yevgeny Prigozhin, the late leader of the Wagner mercenary group, did in 2023, before he too was killed in suspicious circumstances in a plane crash, only a couple of months after his short-lived uprising. Putin knows the risk of another rebellion are undoubtedly on the rise, and his position is in increasing jeopardy. That's why he's doing everything he possibly can to strengthen his position and provide power and wealth to those he trusts most within the FSB. No matter the cost, no matter the loss, he'll do whatever it takes to maintain his position of power. The only question is, will it all be enough? At a time when Russia's military is continuing to suffer incalculable losses, its economy is in a worse state than it's been in years, and its people are struggling even to feed themselves, how long can Putin really hold on? Now, learn more about the chances of a possible coup against the Kremlin in our recent in-depth look at the situation in Moscow. Or check out how Ukraine recently slashed Russia's energy infrastructure, dealing a massive blow and leaving Putin with yet another expensive problem to solve. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our trusted channel too, so you can stay informed and up to date on everything that's going on across Ukraine, Russia, and beyond.